My husband said to stop helping him with things, so I wiped my hands clean. We were arguing about him forgetting his mother's birthday again when Mark finally snapped. Stop treating me like a baby, Jennifer. You handle everything like I'm some incompetent child. I'm 38 years old. I just saved his ass by rushing his mother's gift to her house, pretending he'd arranged it. Mark, you don't even know your social security number. Because you baby me. You do everything. You enable my helplessness. Stop doing shit for me. I'm a grown man. I can handle my own life. I stared at this man who couldn't operate our coffee maker. You want me to stop doing things for you? Yes. Stop babying me. Stop managing my life. Stop acting like I need you for everything. Okay, Mark. I'll stop doing anything for you. Starting now. He actually smiled, triumphant. Good. Finally some respect. Monday morning, Mark's alarm didn't go off. I'd always set it for him on his phone because he couldn't figure out the app. He woke up at 10 a.m., 4 hours late for work. Why didn't my alarm go off? You're a grown man. Set your own alarm. He grabbed his work clothes from the floor, wrinkled, stained. I'd always laid out his clean pressed suits. Where's my suit? In the closet where suits live. It's not pressed. Then press it. Or don't. You're not a baby. He went to work in a wrinkled shirt that had a coffee stain. His boss pulled him aside about professional standards. Tuesday, his phone got cut off. I'd always paid his personal phone bill from his account. Jennifer, my phone's dead. Did you pay your bill? What bill? The one that comes every month. To your email. That you don't know the password to. He had to use his work phone for everything. IT flagged his personal use. Wednesday, he ran out of blood pressure medication. I'd always managed his refills, picked them up, reminded him to take them. Where are my pills? Probably at the pharmacy. Or not. Did you refill them? I don't even know what pharmacy. The one you've used for 8 years. His blood pressure spiked. Splitting headaches started. Thursday, his car insurance lapsed. I'd always paid it from his personal account. Got pulled over for a broken taillight I'd have normally handled. No insurance. License suspended on the spot. Had to Uber to work. $50 each way. Week 2, Mark was falling apart. His credit card got declined at lunch. I'd always paid it from his checking. My card doesn't work. Did you pay your bill? I don't even know how to access it. You're a grown man. Figure it out. He missed his dentist appointment. I'd stopped reminding him. Missed the cleaning means he lost his spot as a regular patient. 6-month wait for new appointment. Tooth started aching immediately. His mother called me furious. Mark forgot his sister's birthday and his father's death anniversary. Why didn't you remind him? Ask Mark. I don't manage his calendar anymore. She called him, devastated. 15 years since Dad died and you forgot? He didn't even know the date. His boss asked about the Hewson report. What Hewson report? The one your wife usually reminds you about. First write-up in his file. His work shirts turned pink. He'd washed them with a red towel. Wore pink shirts all week. Colleagues started calling him Rosé behind his back. He tried to make dinner. Gave himself food poisoning from undercooked chicken. I ate my perfectly cooked meal while he vomited all night. How do you know when chicken's done? He gasped. You're 38. Google it. The final straw came when his passport expired. We'd booked a Caribbean vacation months ago. His idea to fix our marriage. I'd always renewed his documents. Jennifer, where's my passport? Wherever you put it. Is it valid? How would I know? It's your passport. We found it expired. Rush renewal cost $400 he didn't have because his credit cards were maxed from late fees. He missed the vacation and I went alone. While I was gone, everything collapsed. Power to his home office cut off. He'd never paid his separate business utility account. Lost 3 days of work. Final write-up. His tooth abscess got infected. Didn't know how to find an emergency dentist. Ended up in the ER. His mom wrote him out of her will after he missed his father's memorial. His boss fired him for performance issues. Jennifer, please, he sobbed when I returned, tanned and relaxed. I need you to baby you? To help me. I can't do this. But you're a grown man. You said so yourself. You don't need me treating you like a baby. I'm losing everything. Then maybe you should have thought about that before demanding I stop doing everything that kept your life together. He stood there, unemployed, uninsured. His mother disowned him, tooth infected, wearing a shrunken pink shirt. Please, I'm begging you. Handle it yourself. You're not a baby, right? I went to the kitchen to get some coffee while he followed behind me. You have to fix this, he yelled. I smiled at him. Or what? His hand shot out and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, his fingers digging into my skin as he pulled me back toward him. I looked down at where he was gripping me, then back up at his face, which was red and twisted with desperation, and said calmly that he needed to let go of me right now. His grip loosened, but he didn't move away, instead stepping between me and the kitchen doorway, his whole body shaking with rage as he blocked my exit. He said he'd tell everyone what I did, how I sabotaged him on purpose, how I destroyed his life just to prove a point. I took another sip of my coffee and told him he was welcome to explain to people how his wife stopped setting his alarms and paying his bills for him. That's when something in him just broke completely, and he started crying, actually sobbing like a little kid, and dropped down to his knees right there on our kitchen floor. He was begging me, calling me Jenny, which he hadn't done in years, saying he couldn't do this alone, that he needed me to help him. I stepped around him carefully, making sure not to spill my coffee, and told him he should probably figure out how to apply for unemployment benefits, since he was going to need the money. That night, I locked our bedroom door for the first time in 12 years of marriage. I heard him try the handle around midnight, jiggling it softly at first, then harder when it wouldn't open, and finally kicking it once before I heard his footsteps going back down the hall. When I came out in the morning to get ready for work, I found all my work papers thrown around the living room like confetti, folders emptied, documents scattered everywhere. My laptop knocked off the coffee table. I started gathering up my scattered papers while Mark watched from the couch where he'd apparently slept, still wearing that same shrunken pink shirt from yesterday that now had food stains on it too. He asked where his clean clothes were, and I reminded him the washer and dryer were in the basement, same place they'd been for 12 years. He didn't move from the couch, just sat there staring at me with this look of pure hatred while I picked up every single paper and put my work stuff back together. After I left for work, Mark must have tried calling his mother from our landline, because when I got home that evening, he told me she'd hung up the second she heard his voice. He'd thrown the phone against the wall hard enough to crack the plastic casing, and then demanded I call her and fix things between them. I told him that wasn't my mother, and it wasn't my problem to fix. By Wednesday, the smell coming off Mark was getting really bad since he hadn't showered or changed clothes in days. He'd been eating nothing but cereal for every meal, because he couldn't figure out how to cook anything and had no money left for takeout after blowing through what little cash he had. I made myself a nice chicken dinner with roasted vegetables while he stood in the doorway watching me eat. too proud to ask for any, even though I could hear his stomach growling from across the room. That's when Sterling Beck showed up at our door, Mark's old college friend who Mark had apparently been calling and begging for help. Sterling took one look at the situation, saw Mark in that filthy pink shirt with his unwashed hair sticking up everywhere, saw the disaster of our living room and told Mark straight up that he needed to grow up and act like an adult. Sterling was in and out in less than 10 minutes, and after he left, Mark screamed at me that I'd turned everyone against him, that I'd poisoned his friends and family against him. Thursday morning, Mark's tooth pain had gotten so bad he was crying again, holding his swollen jaw with both hands and rocking back and forth on the couch. He begged me to drive him to the dentist, but I reminded him his license was suspended and there was a bus stop just 2 blocks away. He didn't know the bus schedule or have any change for the fare, and when I wouldn't give him any money or information about the buses, he just sat there crying harder. I left for work while he was still on the couch holding his face. When I came home that afternoon, I found he'd completely torn apart the home office looking for his passport and important documents he suddenly needed. Papers were everywhere. Every drawer had been pulled out and dumped. File folders were ripped open and thrown around, and the printer was knocked over on its side. He was sitting right in the middle of all that chaos on the floor, defeated and exhausted, still wearing that same stained pink shirt from Monday that now smelled so bad I could smell it from the doorway. I told him to clean up his mess, but he just sat there, so I stepped over all the papers and went to make dinner for myself. Friday morning, Mark finally dragged himself to the shower, the first one in almost a week, and I could hear him struggling with the hot water knob that always stuck. He came out wearing another shrunken shirt from his attempt at laundry, the sleeves ending halfway up his forearms and pants that were so tight he couldn't button them all the way. "How do you work the washing machine?" he asked me while I was getting ready for work. I walked to the laundry room, pulled out the manual from the drawer where it had been for 12 years and handed it to him. He threw it at my face, missing by a foot, and stormed out of the house slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. That afternoon around 3 o'clock I was reading in the living room when Mark started screaming from the bathroom, holding his jaw and crying that he couldn't take the pain anymore. He grabbed the phone and dialed 911, telling them he needed an ambulance for his infected tooth, and I watched from the window as the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. They loaded him onto a stretcher even though he could walk fine, and as the ambulance pulled away, I went back to my book, knowing that bill would be at least $1,200 plus whatever the ER charged. While Mark was at the hospital, I packed a bag with my clothes, toiletries, and laptop, then drove 40 minutes to my sister Ruth's house on the other side of town. Ruth opened the door before I even knocked, pulled me into a hug, and said she'd been waiting years for me to finally leave him. Her husband brought me a glass of wine, and they set me up in their guest room, and for the first time in weeks, my shoulders actually relaxed. Mark got home from the ER around 10 that night with a prescription for antibiotics and pain meds that cost him $200 he didn't have, and found my note on the kitchen counter saying I was staying with Ruth for a while. He called Ruth's landline over and over. I counted 23 times before she finally unplugged it from the wall. Then he started texting me from his work phone, sending message after message about how I was killing him, how I was evil, how I had to come home right now. I blocked that number too and went to bed in Ruth's comfortable guest room, sleeping better than I had in months. Saturday morning at 7:30, Mark showed up at Ruth's house, pounding on the door and screaming my name loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Ruth's husband went to the door and told Mark to leave or he'd call the police, and Mark started yelling that I was destroying his life, that I was a monster, that everyone needed to know what I'd done to him. The neighbors came out on their porches to watch. One of them had their phone out recording, and Mark kept screaming until Ruth's husband pulled out his phone and started dialing. Mark finally left, but not before kicking their mailbox and shouting that this wasn't over. I spent the rest of the weekend at Ruth's house, eating real meals at regular times, taking long showers without anyone banging on the door, and actually reading an entire book. Ruth helped me search for divorce lawyers online, and we found Duncan McNeil, who had amazing reviews and specialized in cases like mine. I called his office and made an appointment for Monday morning at 9, feeling more hopeful than I had in years. Meanwhile, Mark was alone in our house with no food except cereal, no clean clothes because he never figured out the washing machine and no idea how to fix any of it. He posted on Facebook that I had abandoned him, that I was an awful wife who left her sick husband when he needed her most, and several of our mutual friends started messaging me asking what was really happening. I didn't answer any of them, just took screenshots of his posts for my records. Monday morning, I met with Duncan McNeil in his downtown office, and he listened to my whole story while taking notes on a yellow legal pad. He explained that since I'd been the primary breadwinner for our entire marriage and Mark had no job now, the divorce should be pretty straightforward. Duncan said Mark's recent behavior, especially showing up at Ruth's house and making a scene, would actually help my case if Mark tried to fight anything. After my lawyer appointment, I drove to the house while Mark was out, probably at the library trying to use their computers since he had no power in his home office. The place was worse than I'd ever seen it. Dishes piled so high in the sink that they'd fallen onto the floor, garbage bags torn open with trash spilling out. That awful smell even stronger now. I took photos of everything with my phone, making sure to get the torn apart office, the destroyed kitchen, the laundry room where the manual I'd given him was still on the floor where he'd thrown it. I grabbed more of my clothes, my important documents from the filing cabinet, and my grandmother's jewelry box that Mark had always said was ugly. That same Monday, Mark had figured out the bus schedule enough to get to the unemployment office downtown, but when he got there, they told him he needed his social security card and recent pay stubs to file a claim. He didn't know where his social security card was, had no idea how to access his pay stubs online, and they told him he couldn't file without them. The woman at the desk said he could come back when he had the right paperwork, and Mark had to take 2 buses home with nothing to show for it. Tuesday morning, I drove to Miranda Kramer's office on 5th Street for my first therapy appointment. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun and warm brown eyes that made me feel safe right away. I sat on her leather couch and told her everything about Mark and how I'd been doing everything for him for 12 years. She asked me when it started, and I remembered our second date when he forgot his wallet and I paid for dinner. Then he forgot to pay me back, and I just let it go because I liked him. Miranda wrote notes on her yellow pad while I talked about setting his alarms and paying his bills and calling his mother on his birthday. She explained how I'd become an enabler by solving all his problems before he felt any consequences. I'd trained him to be helpless by always rescuing him from his own mistakes. For the first time since walking away from Mark in the kitchen, I didn't feel guilty about letting him fail. Meanwhile, Mark woke up Tuesday with his face so swollen he could barely open his left eye. The antibiotics from the ER weren't working because he kept forgetting when to take them. The bottle said twice a day with food, but he couldn't remember if he'd taken the morning dose or not. He dry swallowed 2 pills just to be safe, but then his stomach hurt because he hadn't eaten anything. His jaw throbbed so bad he couldn't think straight, and the whole left side of his face felt hot and tight. Wednesday morning, Mark tore through the disaster of his home office looking for his social security card. Papers covered every surface and spilled onto the floor in messy piles. He found old tax returns, expired insurance cards, and bank statements from 3 years ago, but no social security card. Finally, he spotted it stuck to the back of his birth certificate with old tape. He took 2 buses back to the unemployment office and waited in line for an hour. The same woman from Monday looked at his paperwork and typed something into her computer. She told him since he was fired for cause, there was a 3-week waiting period before benefits could start. Even then, he'd only get 60% of his previous salary, and it would take another week for the first check. Mark stood there doing the math in his head and realized he'd have no money coming in for at least a month. That same Wednesday, a bright orange notice arrived from the power company about his home office account. Mark called the number on the notice, but the automated system asked for his account number, which he didn't know. He pressed 0 for a representative who asked for the email on the account, but Mark didn't know his email password. She asked for the last 4 digits of the social security number on file, but it was under my name. Without proper verification, she couldn't help him, and the power would be shut off in 5 days. Thursday morning, Mark sat in the kitchen staring at his phone for 20 minutes before calling Sterling. His hands shook as he dialed and his voice cracked when Sterling answered. Mark explained about losing his job and having no money and needing help with bills. Sterling sighed loud enough that Mark heard it through the phone. Sterling said he'd loan Mark $500, but this was absolutely the last time. Mark had to get his life together because Sterling wasn't a bank. The money would be in Mark's account by afternoon, but Mark needed to pay him back within 3 months. Mark thanked him over and over until Sterling hung up. When the money hit his account, Mark immediately ordered $40 of Chinese food because he was tired of cereal. Then he ordered pizza for dinner because cooking seemed impossible with his infected tooth hurting so bad. By Thursday night, he'd spent almost $100 on food delivery. Friday morning, I met with Duncan at his office to file the separation papers. He explained that Mark would be served within the next few days and might react badly when he got them. Duncan said I should stay away from the house and document any harassment or threats. Ruth had already insisted I keep staying with her as long as I needed. We filed the paperwork at the courthouse, and Duncan said the process would take several months, but the hardest part was starting it. Friday afternoon around 3, Mark heard a knock at the door. A man in a polo shirt asked if he was Mark Thompson and handed him an envelope. Mark opened it right there on the porch and saw the word divorce in bold letters at the top. His face turned red and he started yelling at the process server who just walked back to his car. Mark slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. He called me from the landline, screaming about betrayal and abandonment and how I'd ruined his life. I could hear him sobbing between the yelling and calling me terrible names. I hung up and immediately called Duncan to document the harassment. Duncan made notes and said to keep records of any contact from Mark. Saturday morning, Mark went to the bank to get money from our joint account. The teller pulled up the account and told him half the money had been withdrawn and transferred to a new account. Mark had about $1,200 left total with no income coming in. He yelled at the teller that it was theft, and she needed to reverse it right now. She explained that both parties on a joint account had equal access to the funds. Mark demanded to speak to a manager who told him the same thing. He spent an hour arguing with them before security asked him to leave. Over the weekend, Mark's sister called their mother and convinced her to at least meet with Mark. His mother called him Saturday night and agreed to meet for coffee Sunday, but made it clear she hadn't forgiven him. The coffee shop was 3 miles away, and Mark had no money for an Uber after spending Sterling's loan on food. He walked for almost an hour in his dirty clothes that didn't fit right anymore. His mother was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with her arms crossed. She looked older and tired and wouldn't make eye contact at first. Mark sat down and tried to apologize, but she asked him what date his father died. Mark's mind went blank because he'd never actually memorized it, just relied on me to remind him every year. His mother's face crumpled when she realized he truly didn't know. She stood up and told him he was exactly as selfish as she'd always feared. She left after less than 10 minutes while Mark sat there alone. The rain started on his walk home, soaking through his thin shirt and making his infected tooth hurt even worse. Monday morning of week 4, Mark decided to finally tackle the mountain of dirty clothes piled in the bedroom. He dragged everything down to the basement and dumped it all in the washer together. He turned the dial to hot because hot water cleans better, right? He poured in way too much detergent and hit start. An hour later, he pulled out a mess of shrunken work clothes and gray underwear that used to be white. His last decent dress shirt was now tight enough for a teenager. He stood there staring at the ruined clothes and something inside him just snapped. He screamed and punched the concrete wall next to the dryer as hard as he could. The crack was loud enough that I heard it from upstairs. His hands swelled up immediately and 2 of his fingers bent at weird angles. He couldn't even make a fist anymore. He called 911 crying about the pain, and they sent another ambulance he couldn't afford. The EMT looked at his hand and said it was definitely broken in multiple places. At the ER, they took x-rays and confirmed 3 broken bones in his hand, plus a fractured wrist. The doctor put him in a cast that went halfway up his arm. When the billing clerk came by with paperwork, she asked about his insurance. Mark started sobbing right there in the waiting room, telling her he had no job and no insurance. She handed him forms for financial assistance and told him the bills would total at least $5,000. Other patients stared as he cried harder. Meanwhile, I was meeting Ruth at apartment viewings downtown. The first 2 places were dumps, but the third one was perfect. A 1-bedroom on the 4th floor with big windows and a view of the park. The kitchen had new appliances and there was even a small balcony. It was walking distance from my office and the rent was reasonable. Ruth loved it too and said I deserved something nice after everything. I filled out the application right there and wrote a check for the deposit from my own account. The landlord ran my credit and approved me on the spot. I could move in next week. Back at the house, Mark found a letter from his old company about COBRA insurance continuation. He called the number and learned he could keep his coverage for $600 a month. He asked if there were payment plans or discounts, but the administrator said no. Mark hung up and threw the letter in the trash. He had $1,200 total and rent was due soon. Wednesday, his power got cut off in the home office. He'd ignored all the shut-off notices thinking they were bluffs. He found an extension cord in the garage and ran it from the kitchen to his office. When he plugged in his computer and desk lamp, the whole house went dark. He tripped the main breaker. He fumbled around in the dark basement trying to reset it but couldn't figure out which switch controlled what. He gave up and sat in the dark office, realizing he couldn't even look for jobs online now. Thursday, he walked to the pharmacy to refill his blood pressure medication. The pharmacist was nice and helped him figure out which pills he needed. Without insurance, the cost was $200 for a month's supply. Mark counted his remaining money and realized he could either buy the medication or eat for the next 2 weeks. He walked out without the pills, hoping his blood pressure would stay under control. Friday morning, he took 2 buses to the library to use their computers. He sat down at a terminal and stared at the blank screen. He didn't know how to write a resume or what to put on it. A librarian noticed him struggling and showed him a basic template. She helped him list his work history and education. Typing with one hand in a cast took forever, and he made constant mistakes. He managed to apply to 3 minimum wage retail jobs, but couldn't figure out how to attach the resume file. The applications went through without it. He knew he probably wouldn't hear back. Saturday, I signed the lease on my new apartment and started packing my things. I loaded boxes into my car while Mark watched from the living room window. He didn't come outside or try to talk to me. I took my clothes, my books, my personal items, and my work stuff. I left all the kitchen things, the furniture, the towels, everything he'd need to survive. I made 3 trips back and forth. On the last trip, I saw him still standing at the window. Sunday afternoon, Sterling came by to check on Mark. He walked into the house and immediately covered his nose. The place smelled like garbage and body odor. Dirty dishes covered every surface in the kitchen. Trash bags sat unopened by the door. Mark was wearing the same stained clothes from a week ago. Sterling opened windows and started gathering trash. He showed Mark how to make simple meals like sandwiches and pasta. He wrote down instructions for using the microwave and doing dishes. Mark actually paid attention this time, taking notes with his good hand. Sterling stocked the fridge with easy food and made Mark promise to shower and change clothes. Before leaving, Sterling told him this was rock bottom and the only way now was up. Mark nodded and for the first time seemed to understand he had to save himself. Monday morning, I drove to my new apartment with the last of my boxes and spent the day arranging furniture exactly how I wanted it. The couch went against the window where it would get morning sun, my books organized by color instead of alphabetically like Mark always insisted, and I hung art prints he'd called tacky. I bought bright yellow curtains and a fuzzy purple rug and set up my home office with plants everywhere. My boss noticed the change at work immediately when I started arriving early, instead of rushing in late from dealing with Mark's morning crises. Meanwhile, Mark stood in the kitchen following Sterling's written instructions, boiling water for spaghetti and checking it every 30 seconds to make sure it wasn't burning. He managed to cook the pasta without it turning to mush and heated jar sauce in a separate pot, stirring constantly because Sterling had underlined that part 3 times. When he sat down to eat the simple meal he'd made entirely by himself, his hands shook slightly as he took the first bite. The temp agency called him Tuesday morning after Sterling had quietly put in a word about his situation. The recruiter explained they had a data entry position starting immediately at $15 an hour with no experience required. Mark wrote down the address with his good hand and accepted without asking any questions about benefits or advancement opportunities. He took 2 buses to get there Wednesday morning, getting lost once and having to ask 3 different people for directions. His coworkers were all in their early 20s, and he had to ask the girl next to him how to log into the computer system. She showed him patiently while he typed slowly with one hand in the cast, making mistakes every few words. But he showed up on time Thursday and Friday too, bringing a sandwich he'd made himself and eating alone at his desk during lunch. 6 weeks passed, and Mark got his first paycheck for $420 after taxes. He walked straight to the pharmacy and paid $200 for his blood pressure medication, then took the bus to the utility company and put $100 toward the electric bill. The remaining money went to groceries, actual ingredients Sterling had written down for him instead of just cereal and bread. His sister called their mother and mentioned Mark had been working at the temp agency for over a month. His mother agreed to meet him at the same coffee shop where she'd walked out on him before. This time Mark showed up early, and when she arrived, he immediately apologized for missing their father's death anniversary. March 15th, he said quietly. She didn't smile or reach across the table, but she stayed for the full hour and agreed to meet again next month. 2 months later, Mark was typing 40 words per minute with both hands now that the cast was off. He'd learned the computer system well enough that new temps asked him for help. Every Sunday, he cooked 5 containers of the same spaghetti meal for the week and did his laundry in cold water with the colors separated. The house still had dishes in the sink sometimes and dust on the furniture, but the trash went out weekly, and the bathroom was reasonably clean. 8 months after that kitchen confrontation where he'd screamed at me to fix everything, the divorce was final, and the house sold. Mark texted me from a new prepaid phone about some tools in the garage we'd both forgotten about. His message had proper punctuation and no demanding tone, just a simple question about who should keep them. I texted back that he could have them and gave him the garage code. He replied with just, thanks, and that was it. He'd moved into a studio apartment near the bus line, still working at the temp agency where they'd promoted him to training new hires. His mother came for dinner once a month, and he remembered to call her on her birthday. I'd been promoted to senior analyst at work, and was dating someone who knew how to set their own alarm. We ran into each other at the grocery store 6 months later, and nodded politely before going separate ways. He was buying actual vegetables, and I noticed his clothes fit properly and were clean. Neither of us said anything beyond hey, but I saw him checking his shopping list on his phone, the one he'd learned to use himself. My sister asked me once if I felt guilty about what happened, and I thought about Mark living his small, functional life. He wasn't thriving, but he wasn't drowning either, just quietly managing the basics he should have learned 20 years ago. I told her no, I didn't feel guilty at all. Man, thanks for hanging out and wandering through all this with me today. It was actually really cool to just share these thoughts together. Until next time, take care of yourselves. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.